A licensing trust under New Zealand law is a community-owned company with a monopoly on the development of premises licensed for the sale of alcoholic beverages and associated accommodation in an area. At regular elections, the community in the area votes as to whether to control liquor sales in their area by such a trust. The Invercargill Licensing Trust in 1944 was the first such body, and remains the highest profile example. Most other trusts have been small by comparison, but several have now created a jointly owned management company, Trust House Limited, and the assets and payouts of this are very similar to that of the ILT. The uniqueness of licensing trusts revolves around a responsibility to enhance the well-being of the defined community, the distribution of profits back to the communities, the provision of good model facilities for the sale of alcohol, the provision of accommodation and meals, and gaming, accountability to the communities who own them. In addition, there is an inherent responsibility to efficiently operate commercial businesses profitably. Licensing trusts belong to the family of community enterprises that are part of the third sector, a hybrid form of organization that crosses over sectors, a mixture of market orientation and solidarity. They may be defined as businesses whose primary goals are to support the well-being of the community, principally through reinvesting profits generated from the trading activities either in the business and/or in support of community activities, rather than being driven to maximize profits. History. Context. In the early history of New Zealand, living conditions were often difficult, and hard drinking and the often consequential drunkenness can be seen as a reaction to the times. Abuses, which were common during the 19th century, inevitably brought increasing restrictions through legislation. These abuses gave rise in the late 1800s to the temperance and prohibition movements. In 1893, the Alcoholic Liquors Sale Control Act aligned licensing districts with parliamentary electorates. Licensing polls were to be held with each general election. There were now three options to choose from. These were continuance of the status quo, reduction of the number of liquor licenses by 25%, and local no license, which would prevent public sale of alcohol within the electorate. Continuance and reduction only needed a majority, but local no license needed 3/5 majority. What resulted was that a number of areas voted for a prohibition on alcohol sales. Clutha was the first in 1894, Ashburton and Mataura followed in 1902, Invercargill, Oamaru, and Grey Lynn in 1905, and Bruce, Wellington South, Wellington Suburbs, Masterton, Ohinamuri and Eden in 1908. 1911 saw the peak of the Prohibition movement when it failed by only 20,000 votes to carry national prohibition. Thereafter the strength of the Prohibition movement faded. But it was 1999 before the last dry areas disappeared. Emergence of licensing trusts. On the 25th of September 1943, the voters of Invercargill, by 8,015 votes to 6,342, restored the sale of liquor within the borough. Prohibition had existed for 38 years, and the voting, on the face of it, was apparently a clear indication there was a mood for change. But controversy immediately arose. The 60% threshold necessary to achieve change had only been achieved with the overwhelming support of the soldiers' votes overseas. The domestic vote had been similar to the previous triennial polls at 56.8%. There were suggestions that the voting papers of the soldiers should be returned to New Zealand and recounted, but it was found they had been destroyed in the Middle East. While a good deal of inferences were thrown about, and the Prime Minister, Peter Fraser, offered explanations and a report to Parliament, there was no evidence that what had occurred in destroying the papers was anything other than a misunderstanding. Given the circumstances of the soldiers, it was entirely reasonable that they would give overwhelming support. In Invercargill there was a mood of enthusiasm to start anew, but there were also considerable concerns. In the end, because the community could not make up its mind, the government decided. On the 27th of March 1944, the government announced that they intended to pursue legislation that would set up a trust that would be a body corporate, for the purpose of providing for the establishment of model hotels in the Invercargill licensing district, in the interests of the public well-being, and of providing for the sale of intoxicating liquor in the district, and to provide for the distribution of the profits for public purposes. The New Zealand parliamentary debates during the introduction of the first licensing trust legislation suggest the New Zealand legislation was based on the British Carlisle scheme that had been established during the First World War on the Scottish border, but there were also significant differences. H.G.R. Mason was Minister of Justice from 1935 to 1949 and responsible for the licensing legislation. He shepherded the Licensing Trusts Acts through Parliament, and was strongly committed to the concept of licensing trust. The Invercargill Licensing Trust Act 1944 came into force on the 17th of April 1944. The Masterton Licensing Trust Act followed in December 1947, and the Licensing Act in 1949. Trusts established and demised. 28 licensing trusts were established. 19 remain active today. Invercargill 1944, Masterton 1947, Ashburton 1949, Geraldine 1949. Mount Wellington 1952, Cheviot 1954, Mataura 1955, Clutha 1955, Porirua 1955, Hornby 1958, Oamaru 1961, Birkenhead 1967, Wainuiomata, Te Kaufata 1968, Johnsonville 1969, Otara 1969, Wiri 1969, Parakai 1969, Hardin 1970, Ariwa 1970, Rimutaka 1970, Otu Motai 1971, Stokes Valley 1971, Portage 1972, Waitakere 1972, Wellington South 1972, Terrafiti 1975, Flaxmere 1975. While not all licensing trusts have survived, the 19 that continue to actively trade and be involved in their communities held assets in 2008 of $313 million, generated revenue of $357 million, profits of $42 million, and donated support to the community of $33 million. The collective results of the trusts were presented to the Law Commission in October 2009 as part of a submission, and showed that licensing trusts operate 133 licensed premises, which include hotels totaling 890 accommodation units, and such diverse activities as supermarkets, a housing estate, a hydroelectric power scheme, and property portfolios. Elections and accountability. Trustees for each licensing trust are elected by the community every 3 years at the triennial local government elections. Generally 6 trustees are elected, but some trusts with award system may have up to 9. The elective nature of governance provides a direct link to the community, and accountability thereto. Community support donations. The original licensing trust legislation provided an enabling clause to donate monies back to the communities in support of the promotion, advancement, or encouragement of education, science, literature, art, physical welfare, and any other cultural and recreational purposes, any other philanthropic purposes. Their annual reports example a very wide range of recipients across the broad spectrum of community life. The elected nature of trusts delivers trustees representative of the community with a wide knowledge of its needs. Each trust board decides what community organizations and events shall be supported, and donations are many and varied. As example, Masterton Licensing Trust. In 1968, the then mayor of Masterton advocated to the Masterton Licensing Trust that the wasteland on the edge of the town, bordered by two rivers, be converted into a recreational lake and parklands. Over the years since, the trust has supported the Henley Lake scheme with many donations totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, so that today, a lake of 14 hectares, parklands with walking and running tracks, wildlife reserves, and public facilities support activities generating many hundreds of visitors daily. In the past 10 years, Trust House, the trading arm of the Masterton Licensing Trust, has distributed $31.15 million to its communities. Matara Licensing Trust. For 56 years, the Matara Licensing Trust has been investing in its community, returning profits to its customers and creating jobs. It has been instrumental in future-proofing sporting amenities, as well as supporting the arts, education and destination events, all of which directly or indirectly bolster the local economy. Gore's Multi-Sports Complex is the flagship of its endeavors, a venue featuring the latest water turf technology for hockey, a four-court event center, a short-course Olympic ice skating rink and a two-pool aquatic center established in partnership with local government and sports groups. The complex has hosted national tournaments and events, such as the Young Farmer of the Year. Invercargill Licensing Trust. Several years ago, the Invercargill Licensing Trust, working with all Invercargill school principals, established a goal to pursue initiatives that would lead to Invercargill schools being recognized as leaders in education in New Zealand. A number have since been implemented, supported by trust funding. Portage and Waitakere Licensing Trusts, West Auckland. One of the Waitakere and Portage Licensing Trust's most significant investments in their communities involves the Trust's Stadium. This stadium attracts events from fashion shows to rock concerts, community gatherings to local sporting competitions. The venue has hosted several million visitors since opening in September 2004. It attracts 600,000 visitors a year, making it one of the most accessible stadiums in New Zealand. The Waitakere and Portage Licensing Trusts have supported the Trust's stadium extensively since its inception. The grants provided the backbone of the $28 million spent on the project. Ashburton Trust Event Center. 10 years ago, when the Ashburton community recognized the need for an all-encompassing performing arts center, the licensing trust supported the project, and over the years has contributed $1.6 million to feasibility studies, planning, development and establishment. The Events Center receives around 45,000 visitors annually through shows, conferences and awards ceremonies, many from outside the district, thus enhancing economic growth as well as cultural diversity. Remutaka Licensing Trust. In 2002, this small trust, which operates a one-tavern outlet on the fringe of Upper Hutt City, took responsibility to build a soundshell stage in Harcourt Park. The $281,250 stage was then given to the city and the people of Upper Hutt. Remutaka schools have also benefited from major donations over the past decade. In the 10 years between 2001 and 2010, the trust has supported its community with donations of $4.6 million. Flaxmere Licensing Trust. The Flaxmere Trust was the last of the licensing trusts established in 1975 and over the years has supported its low-income community with wide-ranging grants to education in this village of Hastings. During the last 20 years, the Trust has given $4.7 million to the Flaxmere community. Mount Wellington Charitable Trust. Mount Wellington Charitable Trust was formed in 1964. The Trust focuses on assisting a wide variety of charitable, educational, cultural and sporting organizations located in the local areas of Mount Wellington, Panmure, Glen Innes, Ellerslie and Otahu. The average annual allocation of donations exceeds $1 million per annum. The first major project the Trust embarked upon was the establishment of Swimarama, the local swimming pool complex in 1968. More recent major projects involve provision of technical equipment to lower decile schools in the area, establishment at Bill McKinley Park of artificial turf for soccer and other community sporting activities, and assistance in developing the Auckland netball courts over the past 5 years, which is now one of the largest sporting facilities in Auckland.